So did you grow up in that section of Canada, like the Vancouver, like Western Canada?
Yeah. I grew up in Western Canada and lived in Vancouver and in a town 500 miles north called Prince George. Between
Okay.
those two places.
And then, like, at what
Yeah,
point
so
growing up was it that you thought of? Was it one time you went to the movies, or
yeah, it really was seeing Star Wars, right? The
really?
original back when I was and part of it was there was just so much about the making of that movie. That was the first time you really got a glimpse of, oh, there's an actual job where you make movies and you go do that. So, that had a lot to do with understanding, I think I wanted to work in comic books or something before that, but and then that changed everything. It's sort of like, oh, okay, that's a goal to try and reach is to occurred to me I had too much headroom. So I'm trying to manage yours.
It's all good.
But that would be something to do, and I had a lot of people along the way sort of tell me that it was unlikely, being from Canada as a kid at that time, that that was going to happen. And but my dad was he'd always wanted to be a DJ as a kid, and he didn't do that.
Really, like an old time
Yeah,
radio DJ, like that
yeah,
guy?
that's what he wanted to do, and so he told me that if you want it bad enough, you'll get it. You just have to want it bad enough. And he was a guy who took up the trombone at 45 because of his love of Glenn Miller. Never played a musical note in his life,
That's
and
awesome.
for the latter half of his life, he's still alive, but he's played in multiple bands and so he was sort of proof that you could do things no matter when you tried to do it, as long as you wanted it bad enough.
Yeah, keep that mind sharp, especially at 45.
Yeah,
Mostly people are like, all right, I'm done. I'm gonna whatever I know, I
yeah.
know.
Well,
Like,
yeah,
that's so cool.
yeah. So he's and played all the way up to just a couple of years ago.
Oh wow.
And he's 88 now. So
I'll sign up for 88 right now. you know.
yeah, yeah,
But that's cool that you had somebody like an inspiration, somebody that said, "Hey, if you
yeah.
want it bad enough, you had somebody that'd be like, hey,
Yeah,
you
who,
know
who
what,
never
you can do
who
it."
never said never said it wasn't possible, never said you couldn't do it, never said, oh, why do you want to do that? You should become an accountant. And I think his parents had said that sort of thing to him, which had a lot to do with why he was never going to say it to any of his kids. So, which was great. I feel very lucky for that.
So what was the plan? So Star Wars, were you like 10, 11 ish?
I was 13, I think.
Okay.
What was the plan? You didn't even know enough what to have a plan. There was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
there was a dream at that point, but didn't understand how to get it. There was no internet or anything like that. So I remember going to the university library up at Simon Fraser University and looking through old copies of American Cinematographer and stuff like that, and reading all these things and interviews with filmmakers and things like that, and trying to figure out how you did it. And a lot of them went to USC, and it's just kind of like, well, I don't have the money to go to USC. I try to get into the Simon Fraser film program, and they want you to write an essay. And I tried twice, and both times was rejected. um, because I think my first essay was on Blade Runner, my second essay was on The Thing, and
Wow.
was told that my
Nice.
my interests were far too creative. I mean, far too commercial. And that I found out later you were supposed to write about the professors' movies, their little
uh,
art films that they made, and that's what got you into the program. So fuck those guys.
that's amazing. But that's cool too. We're talking about two amazing movies to write
Yeah,
about.
yeah, I love those films, and neither of them successful when they opened in '82. Both of them were failures, yet have become classics over time.
Yeah, no, I talked to a bunch of people that worked
Yeah.
on Blade Runner, and yeah, no, it's one of those movies. There's so much that like went into that movie, like the set design. It was just different from other movies that were made around that time.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was and it opened the same weekend as Megaforce, the Hal Needham Barry Bostwick classic. If you've ever seen it, Megaforce is the worst. It's got Barry Bostwick. It's anti-terrorism fighters who wear gold spandex. Um,
I gotta check that out. I like
Needless to
Barry Bostwick, so that
yeah, it's Barry Bostwick, Michael Beck, Persis Kambata,
okay.
Henry Silva.
Oh,
It's got
nice. Yeah,
the
good villain.
yeah. Oh, but it is beyond. You watch and you go, how did this happen? How did you make this? Yeah, I remember going to getting tickets for Blade Runner, and the 7 o'clock show was sold out, so got tickets for 9:45, and then Megaforce was playing across the street, and needless to say, it was not sold out. And going to see Megaforce as the appetizer to Blade Runner. So and Megaforce is just Barry Bostwick has blown back hair and a blue headband and gold spandex, and he flies on this motorcycle, and it's just ridiculously
I
horrible.
gotta check it. Well, I'll watch the trailer. I don't know if I'll sing
Yeah,
90
watch the
minutes
trailer.
into my
The
life.
trailer will tell you all you need to know.
I bet that's
Yeah,
probably one of those
3 minutes
movies
is
that were
much better than none.
like money laundering movies. Like there's so many movies that came out in the 80s that you're like, and I've listened to some interviews with directors talking about that. Basically, like the budget. Like you watch that, I don't know what the budget of that movie, but it's funny. Sometimes when you watch a movie, especially nowadays, you look at IMDb, and it's like, how was there 15 million in this movie? And it's like a movie that
Well,
came out in
and I will
85.
tell you a lot of it's speaking from experience. A lot of
Yeah,
times that number's bullshit. The number
really?
that's listed in the IMDb. Yeah, yeah. They say Dracula 2000 cost $50 million. It did not. It cost 29,
Oh,
which
okay.
was still too much. And I've written them saying that is not what this. I've seen the budget. I know what it costs. That is not what this movie cost. And I get crickets in response. um,
They're like, yeah, we're not going to change it.
yeah, yeah. Who are you? You don't know anything.
So where did you end up? Like, where'd you go to school? Was it the film program you went
I
to
ended up going. I
first?
ended up going to Capilano College, which is now Capilano University, and they had a really good sort of a media program. So they had, it was photography and some film and some video production, and mostly what they had was equipment. They had a couple of really good teachers: Jim Bezocchi, Jerry Blitzstein, Peter Kellington, Peter Thompson. I remember those guys really well, and who just sort of taught you basics and were fans of movies. But their real thing was, well, we're told we're supposed to teach you how to be able to work in an IT department in a college or university. But myself and several other guys, the people I went to school with, all became editors afterwards and things like
Oh, wow.
that. But it was access to gear, so we just sat and we shot industrials, shot anything and everything that people would pay us, $100 to do, and would be running all over with this gear, trying to learn how to do stuff, and that's how several of us started, and we're all sort of spread out all over the place now, but probably 5 or 6 people from that class in the year behind me all went on to edited television and a couple feature people and stuff like that.
That's pretty awesome. Did you ever link
Yeah,
up with them like in recent years? Do you still talk to any of them?
some of them, yeah, a couple
That's
of them.
cool.
I still talk to. Sort of spread out as, but that gave the into being able to work in television, which was right at the cusp of going into like electronic editing. So from when they used to cut on film, changing from film to electronic, and being sort of a keener who had a little bit of experience in that, and they were looking for anybody who had any experience. That's how I managed to get in and start, working as assistant editor on an apprentice editor on a show called The Hitchhiker, which was one of I think
Nice.
HBO's very first shows they ever made, which was sort of a sexy thriller or
Like
anthology
the movie, right? Is
show.
it like the Rucker Hauer movie, like in a
No,
TV series?
no,
Oh, really?
the Hitchhiker was a TV series. It was an anthology TV
Oh,
series.
yeah, the movie's The Hitcher.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was a little like, and this was before the Hitcher. And I think it started the year before the Hitcher and afterwards, but they got the Hitchhiker is what it was called, and Philip Noyce directed some, and Carl Schenkel and Colin Buxey, who still directs like episodes of Billions and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
These guys, there were all sorts of interesting directors on it, and they had, I think, they had interesting actors in them over the years in different episodes and things like that, yeah, an editor friend of mine always refers to it as Yuppies Run Amok, because it was the 80s. So, Yuppies Run Amok can get terribly punished for their crimes.
How'd you get that
Yeah.
gig? Were they reaching out to local colleges because they were looking for
Yeah,
experience?
yeah.
Or
It was. They had an American editor and a Canadian editor, because at the time, and I think they still do this up in Canada, you have to, if you bring in an American editor, you have to hire a match. So you're not displacing somebody. So you hire one American,
Really?
one Canadian. And so the Canadian editor was a guy I got introduced to, and I did some volunteer work for them on a different project, and they had an extra spot, and they hired me as the apprentice. And I had been learning the gear that they were using, a thing called the Montage Ones, which was an old early electronic system before Avid and everything like that. It wasn't digital; it was shuttled Betamax tapes. And the other editor, that editor was Michael Robeson, who's now, does tons of TV and different TV movies and things like that. He's done like 250 hours of that stuff. But the other editor on that was John Link. And John Link took that job on the hiatus from Predator. So he had just done the original shoot of Predator, and they had thrown the monster out. And he did this job while they were designing the new Stan Winston monster.
Yeah.
Before they went back and reshot the actual monster in January. So in that fall, this was the job he took. So I got to hear all these stories about the original shoot of Predator and all the other stuff leading up to that. On that job.
That's pretty cool. Jean-Claude
yeah.
Van Damme was
Yeah. But he didn't even know his name at the time. That guy in the praying mantis suit. Yeah, in the praying mantis suit that everybody hated and thought was stupid. So heard all sorts of stories about that, and then John had. His dad was like was an editor or sound guy or something who worked on, and he John had been an assistant editor on Major Dundee, the Sam Peckinpah movie.
Oh,
he cut Electric Gliding Blue. He had an amazing resume, and he went on to cut Die Hard the year after that. So those were the two guys I learned from on my first gig. So it was pretty lucky.
Good. And then right around that time, because in Vancouver, obviously, like the boom started, I guess, right around that time, right? Where Vancouver was full.
Yeah, it really gets
maybe
going
a few
just after that. Yeah, once Cannell comes in, right? Stephen Cannell, their studio started the year after with 21 Jump Street and Wise Guy. So I get a job as...
Did you work on Wise Guy too?
No, I just worked on Jump Street. I was the first assistant editor on 21 Jump Street in the first and second season, when they were still cutting in Los Angeles before they cut in LA, and then went from Jump Street to MacGyver as an assistant editor, then moved up to editing on MacGyver when I was 24.
Wow.
So started editing on MacGyver and did that for 2.5 seasons, and then went on to work for Wes Craven, and then worked for Wes Craven for years. When Wes came up and did a pilot for a show that he'd done called Nightmare Cafe. It was an NBC show at the time. They only did like 6 episodes, but we met and hit it off, and that's how that got started.
Really, from that, and then from there, he like trusted you because
yeah. He called me up and said, I want you to direct my next feature. I mean, edit my next feature when that is ready to go. And at the time, they thought it was going to be Village of the Damned. He was originally going to do Village of the Damned before John Carpenter did, and had quite a different script. And they were waiting on Linda Hamilton, who was playing the mother, and she was going to be the main character. And if she had said yes, then that's what would have happened. But I guess she hummed and hawed. It eventually passed. And so then he had in the interim, he had written what became Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was Nightmare 7 at the time. And New Line were desperate to make that. So because, Village of the Damned wasn't going to happen, he went and made New Nightmare instead. And then he sponsored myself and my family and moved down to the States in 1993 and cut Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Wow. That's such a cool movie, the way he, because it's funny whenever you watch like Never Go to Sleep or Never Sleep Again, the documentary.
Yeah.
And when he every movie after 1, between 2 and 6, he's interviewed and he's like, yeah, I saw it. I really didn't care for it. It wasn't the story that I liked. And then,
he flatly hated the second one. He just it was the worst. He may never have said that, but he certainly said that to me, and I don't think he'd mind me saying it now. But the third one he had co-written, was originally supposed to direct, but didn't direct. He never talked much about the 4th and 5th and 6th ones. He just sort of shrugged his shoulders at them.
But the other ones blew people up because wasn't it the third one was directed? Was that Chuck Russell directed that one?
Third one was Chuck Russell, and then Rennie Harlan and Stephen Hopkins.
It was the fourth one,
and Rachel Talalay.
That's cool. She got a shot when you watch the documentary.
Yeah,
that was pretty neat.
She started. She was the accountant on the first one.
Yeah.
And Wes always had very nice things to say about her. He was always very positive and was glad she got that opportunity. Sorry, I have a cat who's yelling at me.
Totally fine. But no, that's pretty cool because New Nightmare, obviously, it's such a different entry. And that's, I think, what Wes did. His movies are really different because obviously New Nightmare and then the Scream movies you worked on, which really, they started as like, they were kind of like a laugh, not a laugh in the face of horror, but they're kind of like spoofy the way they use all the tropes from other movies combined.
They're very self-aware.
Yeah.
They become their own character within the world. I mean, the thing about New Nightmare is that it's actually really horrific, and I think Wes was a lot of it was about the experience that he had gone through in making the movie and sort of the world within the world. Some of the experiences that I think Heather had actually had following that weren't related to Nightmare fans, but were related to other things that made him want to tell that story in that way. And it was such a unique way to do it, to have Robert playing Robert and Bob Shea and everybody. We actually cut out Mike DeLuca, although I've spoken to Mike many times since then about that, and he was like, "Oh, you're better. It was better off without me." But it was a big swing because it was an unusual take. It wasn't quite as successful as they hoped. It opened the same weekend as Pulp Fiction, which was the movie everybody remembers for that time, but. Yeah, I have a lot of pride in having worked on New Nightmare. I think Wes did an amazing job on it, and I think there's so many things when you watch the film. The earthquake sequences. Most of the earthquake sequences were shot before the Northridge earthquake.
Oh,
They went
really?
back afterwards and shot the collapsed buildings to cut in, but he had written that into the story before the Northridge earthquake happened.
Holy shit.
Uh, so give me 1 second. I just gotta. My wife just texted me. I have to text her back.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, give me just 2 seconds.
Yeah, take your time.
Still just give me 1 second. Excellent. Thank you. Sorry about that. I
No,
was
don't
expecting
worry about it. I wrote it down, so I'll edit that out. Don't worry
that.
about that.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
but even between that, so obviously you had Wes that was like a champion in your corner that you
Yeah.
worked
Yeah.
on
I
with it
was
a
very
bunch.
lucky
But
to to
from there,
to,
you
to
worked
work
on
with
some
him.
cool movies in between that and Scream, Vampire in
Yeah.
Brooklyn,
Yeah.
Doctor Who movie.
Yeah, that I did a number right back to back that I was really lucky to do. Vampire in Brooklyn, which was for Wes again, which was uh, Vampire in Brooklyn was a weird thing because Eddie wanted to make Serpent and the Rainbow. That's not specifically that, but that's what he wanted Vampire in Brooklyn to be.
Yeah.
That sort of scary, intense. And the studio wanted, Wes's version of Beverly Hills Cop, and so there was a real disconnect over, Wes was dragged into Sherry Lansing's office, not physically, maybe, but during production as of shooting, and she's yelling at him, going, it needs to be funny, like The Shining when Jack says, "Here's Johnny." It needs to be funny, and Wes is just like, "Do you hear yourself? You're telling me it needs to be funny like The Shining. That's what you're saying."
Yeah.
And so that was a problem. The original version of the script had all this great epic stuff in it. It was, Charlie Murphy and the two other writers who worked on it. Eddie's brother, who believe it since passed away, but they
Yeah.
had a really fun, big, vampire action movie in Brooklyn. The end was took place on an oil tanker that was hanging off the side of the Brooklyn Bridge. It was a
Oh
fight in
my
the
god.
Rapids, and it was spectacular. And they didn't have the money for it, and they refused to give them the money for it. They wouldn't. I think they only shot in Brooklyn for like 3 days, and the rest of it was all shot in the back lot. And I think Eddie at the time. He'd had a long relationship with Paramount that I think both of them were getting a little at odds with, and with the budget cuts, it ended up being a fist fight, a fist fight in an apartment,
Yeah.
and it's one of those perfect examples of like a death of a thousand cuts. The original first cut of that movie is it's almost like over 2.5 hours long.
Oh
There's
my god.
and what happened is every time a big horror action set piece was replaced, it was replaced with a dialogue scene. It did not happen all at once. It happened bit by bit by bit. So suddenly we had this talking head movie that was supposed to be this, Eddie Murphy horror comedy action movie, and it was, and because it had happened in these little increments, people didn't totally notice that was what was happening.
Yeah.
Because you're also just desperate to get it started and get it made, and just please let us survive. And I think that was one of the challenges with that, because I think that the intentions of it were so much bigger and broader, and it And years later, when Wes made Cursed, he
Oh yeah.
kept trying to refuse Cursed because he says, "I made this movie. It's called Vampire in Brooklyn, and it didn't work because of these reasons." And then history just repeated itself in even worse ways. But that's for later.
But
Yeah.
man, that's pretty wild. Yeah, sometimes the studio just, I'm sure you've dealt with that working with all different studios over the years, right? When they get involved, especially the stories with New Line over the years, the people would do that or
Well,
even
it all depends on who has the voice and their passion for movies. Some studio people and producers are hugely passionate about movies, and as such, are great partners. And the trick is always just making the same movie as them. Others have very different ideas. I think uh, on editing Mimic for Guillermo del Toro, it was very clear that the movie Dimension Films thought they were getting and the movie that Guillermo was making were not the same movie. When you see on the call sheet day 75 of 50, things have gone awry. And on New Nightmare, part of the deal is that Wes had Final Cut if it scored 72 or higher at the preview. I think it scored like 74 on the first
wow.
screening, and Bob Shea was almost enraged that Wes had Final Cut, and there was nothing they could tell him. The very first screening we had for New Line was a technical disaster, but eventually all worked out. And there was 30-something executives, and Bob Shea spoke first, and he was a little disappointed because the movie's a slow burn and stuff like that. And just blah, 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 blah. I think I need to do this, this, and this. And then he went around the room asking all his people, and Wes was there, and I was there, and the producer was there. And every other executive or junior assistant would ever start with, well, basically, I agree with Bob, Bob Shea, and except for Mike DeLuca. DeLuca spoke last. DeLuca now runs Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
The film division, and DeLuca was just like, nah, I totally disagree. I think this is a really sophisticated piece of suspense. I totally get why you're doing a slow burn. I think it's so much better than any of the other movies, and it is completely the kind of movie we want to make for this franchise. And it was, and he had the last word. DeLuca produced Drive Angry, and we went to him. Part of the reason we took that movie to him, because we had a lot of people wanting that at the time, fools that they were, was because of that experience. And I told him that. I said, that moment when we had almost gone with somebody else, another producer, which would have been a disaster. And Mike said, no, I want to do it. And we canceled the agreement with the other guy, saying, okay, well, let's not agree. And we hadn't sent him any paperwork or anything. And then went to Mike, and within minutes, we were like, oh, he's the guy. And then so much of it was based on that experience on New Nightmare.
Wow. So at this point, like it's right. You just mentioned Mimic before, and then Scream '96. So you didn't direct the first movie until, was it the Prophecy 3 was the first one you did, or Dracula?
Yeah, Prophecy 3 was the first thing. It was the first thing I directed.
Cool.
They made a deal with me to, they wanted, Dimension Films wanted me to stay editing for them. And so I did Halloween H2O for them after Scream 2. And they were like, and then you'll direct Prophecy for us. But then they were like, oh, but we need you to cut Music of the Heart for Wes. And then we want you to do this other thing, and then we want, but then you have to do Scream 3, which was great. As they say, a friend of mine, Clark Henderson, who worked for them for years, used to always say, they don't pay you for what you do, but what they do to you. And all the stories about them are pretty true. But at the same time, Bob Weinstein gave me a chance to direct that movie, Prophecy, and the two executives, Richard Potter and Andrew Rona, were great and very supportive, and we had Christopher Walken for 7 days, and a very different story before we started shooting, which was pretty cool. And then they were like, "Yeah, that character that has that one line of dialogue, we want them to be the main character now, and we want you to get rid of this whole part of it, and then we want you to do." And it was just like, what? And Joel Sisson, who produced it and co-wrote it with Carl Dupre, said to me, "You just have to love every mutant child." It was just like, oh man, okay. And we changed it to what it is. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's fun and it has some fun
Yeah.
action to it. And Chris was great and was great to work with, and Vince Spano was great, and we had Brad Dourif and Steve Heitner and stuff like that. Angels running amok and motorcycle chases and yeah, it was a fun experience.
Yeah, but you got your shot, which is cool. Is that something like throughout the 90s? Obviously, Wes was keeping you busy. Were you always like reaching out or saying, "Hey, I want to direct"?
Reaching out
for like directorial jobs or anything like that.
I was cautious about that. That you meet so many like PAs or whatever who just come in and it's like, well, I don't want to do this. I want to direct, and it's sort of, this is like, be careful with that. Be careful who you tell that to.
Yeah.
Because it sort of makes you look like a dumbass. Now, things are a little different now because everybody has a camera on their phone. They can do whatever they want at incredibly high res and things like that. So, I wanted to do it, and then they offered it because I'd had a chance to go edit a big feature away from them. And they were like, no. What will it take to keep you here? What if we give you an opportunity? And so that, and because at the time there was this huge direct-to-video market, right? That was a huge thing at the time. That chance to do that it was actually a big deal. I think the budget ended up on Prophecy was just under $5 million in 1998. Now, $3 million of that was above the line. They had said we want to make it for $3 million, and Joel had said the only way you can make this movie for $3 million is if you don't shoot a frame. Because of the original producers, the original writer, they all got a piece of the action.
Yeah.
They all got a lot more than I did, but and Chris got over $1 million and things like that. So
I'm sure.
So it now you wouldn't make that movie wouldn't be made.
Yeah.
People wouldn't spend that money. It's trying to get $5 million for anything is nightmarish. But it was a great opportunity and worked with some really cool people and I was very grateful for it.
That's awesome. So when you're a director, are you managing the budget, or is that something that the producer, or is there somebody that is going to you like, hey?
It's different. I think different directors do it differently. A lot of companies these days don't ever want you to see the budget. They don't want you to know what it really is, what the numbers really are. So they're very guarded about that. Joel and those guys were very open about it because I was responsible, and so as such, they're like, okay, this is where we need to make cuts. This is what we need to do. We need to bring this down to this, and this. And I always tell producers I work with, this is like, if you bring me in those conversations, I can help you save money. We can figure out ways to do it. There's so many different ways to tell the story. But if you don't tell me what the problem is, I don't know how to solve it for you. or help you solve it. And just, often you'll hear producers and stuff, they'll just make this sort of blanket thing. Well, we're just going to cut the sequence. It's like, no, 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 no. That's not the thing to do. The thing to do is figure out what your issue is. Let's figure out a different way to do that. We this last film we were on, I was on, and there was a thing of, the original UPM left the show for all sorts of reasons, but when he was there, he was just trying to cut stuff that was like, why are you cutting that? and he would just make these blanket statements, and then we went in and just like, no, let's look at what we're actually going to see. So we're not actually going to see that. So let's get rid of this part of this and this part of that, and actually focus on the things that are going to be in there. Them doing it in a vacuum where they're saying, "Oh, we're just going to cut this," is the worst.
Yeah.
Because it's like, no. It's like, only build what you'll see, and only pay for what you'll see, and don't hesitate to really look at what that is. Some people are like, well, I need everything. Well, you don't need everything. You have to have a little discipline if you don't have the money. If you got the money, sure, have everything. Be a Marvel fan, have everything. But yeah, that's working for everybody these days.
Yeah.
But if you're not that, then you have to be very in tune with what it's going to be. And my experience, directing and being an editor was always incredibly valuable, because I had it, I could reverse engineer from what it was going to be in the cut.
Yeah.
So we don't need this, we're going to need this. We don't need that, we're going to need this. We don't need to redo all these takes. This line's going to play here, this line's going to play there. If, we actually have this, and being able to move on, because some people don't do that, right? They hose everything down. They do too many takes. They start chasing something, as opposed to, the better is always the enemy of the good. So when you keep chasing for better and you have good, that's unless you have the money and the time, but nobody gives you that anymore. So
unless you're David Fincher and you make people do like 200 takes.
Right. Well, that's an old Kubrick thing. Right?
Yeah.
But that's, there are very few people who are at that level who can do that.
Yeah.
So if you're not at that level and you can't do that, and you don't have that kind of support, then you have to figure out how to maximize what you do have. And
I think that's what works well.
Having input in the budget. Yeah.
Having like the editing background, like you said, like that's so great that you could do that because you visualize it. Not saying directors that just direct it over years, they learn from that, but you have that already in your thought process, which has got to be so helpful while you're on set.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's totally true.
So when it comes to like budgets, like you mentioned, like how much it was, like 3 million they said, and then 5. Is it more difficult if it's like to manage a larger budget? I know you said you don't know, like they don't really tell you, but I'm sure a movie like Drive Angry was up there in the movies that you directed, right?
Drive Angry, I can tell you exactly what it was made for, minus Nicholas's fee, Nick's fee. And so the actual physical cost of making Drive Angry was $15.2 million.
15, really?
Yeah. Now the reports that you read online say it costs anywhere between 40 and 50 and whatever. And it's just kind of like, well, on paper, maybe that's what people say it costs. The actual below the line budget, I know Nick's fee above that. I think Nick at the time may have made something like 11 on it. So that's
insane.
So that makes so that brings the budget up to like 26 and things like that. And then there's other fees and other fees and other fees and other fees and other fees. The money we had to make the movie was 15.2.
Wow.
But granted, Nick is a big part of that. So the 11, you have to factor that. But there are weird restrictions with each. Now, I never saw the budget. I was told a number.
Yeah.
But no, the budget was not anything. And of course, you're forbidden to talk about it. It's now so many years behind. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody will give a shit. So, and if they do, oh well.
Yeah.
Um, and there are different fees and things like that, and blah 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 blah.
That's a good looking
Uh,
movie. Like I know it's 2011,
yeah,
good special effects. If you think about it, like I know you said you have to factor in Nick's fee, but 5-6 million for
it needs
Prophecy
its fee
3.
is it's that's the yeah. Oh no, that it was a good budget, and
Good
we
movie.
had like 45 days to shoot it, and
Wow.
it was the longest shoot personally I've had, and well, Dracula 2000 we actually shot more days because we moved from Toronto to New Orleans, we only did like one day of pickup shoots and Drive Angry. We did, I think overtime on one day of those 45 days. Because they were like, we don't want you to do any overtime. And I was just like, okay, just tell me where the fence is and I'll play within the fence. But you have to tell me where the fence is. If not, we're just going to do whatever. And Nick was amazing to work with. He came in knowing every line of dialogue and having a really interesting take on the character and many variables of it. He said I could do it like this, I could play it like this, I could play. He had different ways to do it, and we sort of went for this. This ghost, this Edgar Allan Poe ghost via the Terminator was the thought. That was how he used to do it. And Fichtner was amazing, and Billy Burke, and I think it's the best thing Amber Heard's done, and of course we had Tom Atkins and David Morse, and who were all wonderful. It was Tom Atkins' birthday yesterday. So,
I saw that. Yeah, we just talked about Halloween 3 like a month ago, and it's so funny. Like every woman in that movie, he seems like he slept with. He flirts with every woman, and like there's only like 4 women in the movie, but
he's Tom Atkins. I mean,
I know.
He is the silver fox.
He is, yes. Now, quick, like back to like the Scream movies, because I think those are like the horror movies that, like, as a whodunit, it's not like a lot of times horror movies were like that, and that's I was like, I think 11 or 12 when it came out, and those are my favorite movies. Like they were so good. I love Scream 2.
Yeah, and that's that's a huge credit to Kevin Williamson who wrote it. Right?
Oh yeah,
because so many of the original, outside of Michael Myers and Jason and stuff, so many of the original slasher movies are whodunits, and then there were none. Right, there, Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
Yep. With kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do you know when you're editing the movie? Do you know from the beginning? Do you get the script and you know who it is at the end?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So when we were cutting Scream the first time, there was one scene we cut out that it was with Billy and Stu. And just the way they played it, you were like, "Oh, it's them!" And it happened before the party. It was like sunset and whatever. We're like, "We can't keep this scene."
Cool.
It tells you, and so we cut that out. And other than that, there was just trims and stuff. But it was we weren't sure how scary it was until we previewed it for an audience. We all thought the mystery worked really well. It's one of the thing I love about Scream is that the two bad guys are the smartest people in the room.
Yeah.
They are never discovered. They reveal themselves. That's a really significant change. It's not like Sydney doesn't figure it out. they reveal themselves, and it's just like, oh, each time she thinks she figures it out, there's something that they throw her off because they are the smartest. And I think for each one of the sequels and everything that follows it, that's a real challenge because it's something to live up to, right? And, the
Yeah.
first one is so original out of the gate, and and Wes and Kevin were so in sync. And I know when were looking for directors on the original one, and Wes had turned it down and several times, and until they made him an offer he can refuse. So many of the other directors who I think met on screen when it was called Scary Movie felt it was more of a comedy.
It was called Scary Movie?
Yeah, it was the original title.
That's pretty funny. And then they made the spoof movie a couple years later called Scary Movie.
The slates for the first part of the shoot all say Scary Movie.
That's awesome.
Wes never shot it. He shot his movie that had some funny lines in it, but he shot it straight. He refused to be in on the joke that there was, and that's, I think, the success of that movie. It's such a mix of not just horror. I mean, it's a brutal movie.
Yeah.
Drew Barrymore's death at the beginning is so horrific and tragic. That it sets you, and Wes had said that, he had said that, you have to make the audience think you're insane. You have to show them that they are not safe. And then they'll doubt everything you do. It buys you, character development time, and you can do all these other things because they will just be so unhinged by what you've done out of the gate. And that's what that opening sequence is a brilliant demonstration of.
Yeah, and when you think of the movie, like, she's the name that people recognize. The most famous people in that movie are her and Henry Winkler, right?
Yeah. That's very true. It's Drew Barrymore and the Fonz.
And and that's one of my favorite parts of the movie is Fred the janitor.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, Wes's little cameo, and that's actually Freddy Krueger's sweater that he's wearing.
That's amazing.
That's the real, because Wes kept all those costumes.
Oh, really?
That's the real.
That's awesome.
That's the real thing that he brought up to do that for his cameo. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite of the sequels you worked on, like 2 or 3?
That's I think they both have great stuff in them. I love the openings of all 3 movies. The openings, I think, I think each opening is great. There's sequences in the other ones. The first one, I think, is definitely, the best of all of them. There's lots of things in the second one I really like. I love the cop car sequence, when they're in the cop car and the guy gets impaled.
Talking about brutal. Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah.
Sarah Michelle Gellar, her scene's great. The ending sequence, I think, is pretty great. Like, that's pretty frightening.
Jerry O'Connell.
But
the ending sequence, I think, is fantastic. I love Cotton Weary's arc in that one. Is great. I love the fact that the third movie opens with Cotton. I think the third movie is a little more, because it didn't have Kevin on it, it's a little more Scooby-Doo. I think the mystery doesn't really work as well because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think in the first 2 movies, the mystery's more personal. I think the third movie, it's sort of like, well, it had to be somebody. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
The thing I love in the third movie is Patrick Dempsey and Nev's relationship.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good. I hope if they do get Nev back for Scream 7 or whatever, they bring Dempsey back.
I think they have to.
Because that his character in that film and how he played it, because he didn't know at the time they were shooting on any given day in the third one, because they were making it for a release date, and they didn't have a finished script when they started. He didn't know if he was the killer or not. So Wes had told him to play that. The first, the scene in the police station was, I think, one of the first scenes they shot. and he hadn't even read Dempsey hadn't even read the whole script, so he plays it in such an interesting way. He's playing it that way because he has no idea where the character's going
Wow,
at
that's
all.
cool.
So there's so many interesting things that he does, editing that scene was so much fun because of him, because he did all these nuanced things, and she's at different points sort of trusting and then completely suspicious of him, and that's because nobody knew what was going to happen. And of
That's a
course,
pretty
the third
interesting
one
way
has
to
Parker
do it.
Posey. Yeah, well, it's not the ideal way to do it, but
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
certainly they made it work. And
Yeah.
the third one has Parker Posey, who is just awesome. So
Awesome. And then I think
yeah, I
Timothy
love
Olyphant,
Parker.
I think he's so good. And that was like young him.
Yeah.
Like Go was a year or
Oh,
two
it's
after
one of his
that.
first things. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, Timothy Olyphant was great. He's a good villain.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah.
Mickey.
One of the best. And then
Yeah.
so for
Yeah.
like back to directing wise, because I don't want to take up too much time. I always try to make this right around an hour, but I think it's so cool. Like you do Dracula 2000, and then you do the 2 sequels after that. But I think one of
Yep.
the best movies I personally that I think you've done, maybe you'll agree, is My Bloody Valentine, because I think it's so hard to do a remake because you have something that is sort
Yeah.
of in your mind, right?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I actually really loved working on that film and had a great experience on it. You know, we shot it in native 3D and then and with cameras that were built 2 days before we started shooting.
Oh my
So,
god.
everything we did on that show was like, oh, nobody's ever done this before. So it was filmmaking wise, it was a bit of an agonizing experience. But it's, watching the original, we wanted the opening sequence to be like a truncation of the entire original film. So that's how we approached it, and we're with Todd Farmer, who I wrote Drive Angry with, and who wrote he and Zane Smith wrote Bloody Valentine. Todd and I talked a lot about the homages to the original film, how we wanted to take people on that journey, and almost have them then pick up 10 years later. We loved the mine setting, loved the whole look of the miner. I thought it was a great villain. And then we went through several iterations of who was the killer. I think in Zane's version it was Axel, like in the original, and and Axel had the real Harry Warden in a cage in the basement and kept him there for 10 years. He was still the sheriff, and he was still married to Sarah Palmer, but it was like, that's crazy. And then there was another version where Harry Warden was the actual real killer, that he was always there and just came back to town. And then when Todd and I went in and redid it, that Tom was in fact the killer himself and was sort of looking for himself. Tom was the hero and the villain simultaneously. That became the thing that was the most interesting to us, and certainly was interesting to Jensen when we got Jensen. And Jensen was very adamant. He didn't want to play it like somebody who knew that he was the bad guy. He wanted to play it like somebody like he didn't know. I've had somebody recently ask me if was it a multiple personality, or was it was he possessed by Harry? And it's there's arguments for both. You should see it. If we'd ever done a sequel, we had a different explanation for why Tom was the way he was. But it's it basically that's the viewer's choice. Whatever works for you is what he is.
Yeah. Did you have a
it
sequel
was
written
fun.
or anything, or?
We did, yeah.
Oh, cool.
We did, and went to not New Line, to Lionsgate to do it. Because the movie made a ton of money, and they were about to be bought up by Carl Icahn, and that the success of that opening weekend of that movie kept them from being bought. It saved their company. And they were like, we don't want to make movies like this anymore. They were starting to phase out their Saw movies. They were starting to feel that they were in a different arena than that kind of movie. I remember being told by one of the execs there that it was just sort of a blunt hit in the face, and it's just sort of like the title tells you what it is.
Yeah, yeah,
That is, the title is not subtle. And so that's what we made, a movie that was not subtle.
yeah.
So we went back to them probably every year, and then every other year, and then every 3 years and stuff after that movie came out. And then just, I hear rumors that they're going to redo it and reboot it and do whatever. But yeah, we wrote a really
That's cool.
fun version that brought everybody back, and they all would have come back. They all said that. So, and had some really cool scenes in it, and still managed to figure out a way of making Jensen's character both the hero and the villain simultaneously, and even more.
Man,
the
we
hero
saved your company. Do our sequel.
Yeah, but they were, it's funny. I just heard a lot of people say that. Well, the only reason that movie made any money was because of the 3D, and it was just kind of like, well, the 3D movie came out at that time and didn't, it was sort of dismissed because of that. And I was just kind of like, well, I think there's a little more to it than that. But, it's all water under the bridge now.
Yeah, usually, like, when people could say that, maybe it's for opening week, but when there's sustained success, that's where the difference is. Because usually, if you look at any movie that they say, quote unquote, bombed, you look at the first week and it's like, oh, the next week drops, and then it's out of the theaters,
Yeah, I mean, and at the time, we there was only like 900 or something 3D theaters, and we were only in the theaters, those 3D theaters, for 3 weekends because then Coraline was coming open, and then we got pulled out. So the movie would have made even more money if it had managed to keep the theaters even longer.
Jesus.
But that wasn't the nature of how that worked at that time in 2009. So it is what it is, but it is, we're all, Todd and I frequently talk about how, we would love to have gone back in and brought back, Jensen and Kerr and Jamie and Eddie Gathegi. We'd even joked about trying to bring Tom Atkins back with an iron jaw.
That's
cranking
cool.
away.
Todd's he's pretty interesting because the way he was able to write that Jason X script, I think, is pretty wild. That it's like, hey, we want you to write this movie, but hey, you can't do anything that would affect Freddy versus Jason. So then it's like, oh, you know what? We'll just have him go into the future.
Yeah. No, it was they gave him a very oddly specific set of restrictions.
Yeah.
And he defeated their restrictions.
Yes, he did.
But Todd's a he's a clever fella. So I'm not surprised he did that.
So I know, Patrick, you're working on stuff right now. Was it Aftermath? Is what you just got done with?
Yeah, or? Aftermath. We've just finished it.
Cool.
So I'm not sure where it will land in the because it was an independent movie and sales and distribution and things like that. But we literally got the last visual effects shots in like 3 weeks ago, and it's. We shot it last year, but we knew there was going to be a lot of visual effects just because of where it takes place and the nature of that. But it was a great cast, and it's a fun, exciting movie. It's very much an action movie. Dylan Sprouse and Mason Gooding, who was in the last 2 Scream movies and going to be in the next one. And Deitch and Lockman and Megan Stott, and they were so much fun to work with, and it was it's a fun little action movie that has a vibe. Somebody said, "Oh, this movie feels like an intense horror movie, but it's an action movie." It's like, well, yeah.
All right, cool.
You're right. That's that's
You're
the
like,
point.
I have experience with that.
Yeah. That's just where my brain goes. But it's fun. So look for it when it drops.
That's awesome, man. Patrick, this has been great.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to call out was I think it's so cool whenever people work on something and later on they're in a different iteration. I thought it was cool you got to direct an episode of Scream the TV series.
Yeah. They'd originally asked me to do the pilot, but I was in the middle of the whole Terminator thing at the time.
Oh, cool.
When I was working at Terminator Genesis, so I couldn't do it. But I remember reading it, and I remember what Wes's input on the pilot was. Don't try and roll a severed head into a hot tub. Severed heads don't roll really well. You have to throw it. And then was thrilled to be able to come back the year after and work on that. It was actually really fun, even though it was a different mask and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Sort of understood the dynamics of the series. Yeah, and then used a lot of sort of the Scream stuff on an episode of The Purge that I did, which was
really? That's cool.
Had a lot of had a lot of sort of slashery elements to it, and even more so, I think, than the episode of Scream, the series, which was really fun.
That's cool. You gotta check that out. No, I like the Scream the TV series. I thought it was pretty good for an MTV show. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, and a good cast, and Will Fitzgerald and Beck Taylor Krause and the all the other guys, people in it. Tracy Bindorf, who of course was in New Nightmare, played the mom.
Yeah.
And,
oh yeah.
So they have all sorts of West connections there. And, I think he was very supportive of that before he passed. That was going to go on. He passed just before it came out. But
oh wow.
Yeah, I was very lucky to work with him and for him.
Yeah, no, that's cool. One of the best. I've never talked to anybody that worked with him in the '90s, but I talked to people that worked with him on the first Hills Have Eyes, and then Hills Have Eyes 2. I talked to somebody, Kevin Spiritus. So it was cool hearing these different portions of Wes's career, and it seems like he was always the same, which is good to hear about people that they don't change.
Very much. And he's very smart and very funny, and had this sort of wry wit about him, and he was very giving of his knowledge. I was really lucky to work with him, because I would just ask him questions the whole time. Well, why'd you do that? Wow, why'd you win this? We were running out of time. Well, I was just hoping we'd get away with it. He had a really good nuts and bolts sense of things, and then also a great sense of character, and where that so many of his movies always end with the evil coming home to the house, whatever that is, because he just says, that's where most evil happens to most people, is at home. So it's like, but
dark.
Dark. So, but he had that streak.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, this has been awesome, man. I'll look out for Aftermath, and thanks so much for taking the time. I'm glad we finally connected.
Right. Thanks so much, Nick. It was great to talk to you. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, no problem, man. Have a great rest of your night.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. You too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.